Japan is a bigger problem than China. 900 million tons of plastic waste generated.
营业额超过5亿人民币。
Country is producing the most packaging waste.
I think you can guess. It's
Not surprised.
Origin， 欢迎收听 Origin 可持续进化论，这是 Origin 研究所旗下的一档播客节目。我是所长一佳，在这里你会遇见各行各业深耕可持续的有趣灵魂，一起聊聊关于可持续、消费、创新、投资和环境保护的话题，让我们和世界一起进化出更好的样子。Back to the origin。
说到环保产业呢，大家都会觉得是个特别不挣钱的事儿。但是呢，今天呢，我们要对话的这家公司呢，则是把环保做成了年营业额超过5亿人民币的大生意。同时呢，还帮助呢全球2亿人呢收集垃圾，减少了近80亿件的废弃物，真正把环保呢做成了可持续的好生意。这个公司呢就是 TerraCycle。今天呢，我们要对话的就是 TerraCycle 的亚太区总经理和可持续解决方案的领导人川段先生 Eric。而在请出 Eric 之前呢，还想给大家提一个问题就不知道大家知不知道呢？2021年举行的日本奥运会，它的领奖台是什么做的？大家呢可以到我们的小红书、微博、ins 上去看看当年这个领奖台的图来好好猜猜看。我敢说99%的我们的听众可能都猜不到。那这个呢也是呢 TerraCycle 的一个经典案例那下面呢我们就来问问 Eric， 让他来揭晓谜底。
the way we created the podium was by collecting used packaging at retail stores, about 2,000 retail stores across Japan.
今天呢要特别提示大家一下，就是这一期节目呢是我们 Origin 进化论第2期的英文采访，想要练习听力的同学们就可以赶快进来，而想阅读呢完整的翻译版呢，就请关注我们的微信公众号 Origin 研究所。
And so anybody who had an empty, hair care or home care package could take the empty bottle or package into the retail store, deposit it, and they would know that that would be recycled, and the recycled material would be used to make the Olympic podium. So you could participate, your package, your piece of trash from home could go into something that's going to be seen, on TV by millions and millions of people all over the world. So it was a pretty cool opportunity and education to people that, this thing that you think is trash, if it's properly cleaned and recycled, can be used to make something as beautiful as the Olympic podium. And so that was made of shampoo bottles, laundry detergent bottles, and
everything.
Yeah. And the front of it was 3D printed, and the inner panels that were used in the structure, you cannot see them, but the inner panels also included ocean plastic that was collected off the beaches in Japan and recycled as well.
Wow, who had that genius idea?
So I had been in meetings with P&G and the president of P&G Japan. We were talking about a project that we could do with a large retail company, and just came up with the idea of doing something for the Olympics, because Procter & Gamble is a global sponsor for the Olympics. And we assumed that any retailer would be really interested in hosting a venue for collection for something to make for the Olympics. And that's how the idea came around. And thinking about what we could build, right? Thought about something that would be very visible, something iconic. And the podiums are used for all the medal ceremonies, the gold medal, silver medal, all the award ceremonies. And so I thought, wow, that would be really cool, because that would be on TV, for every medal ceremony, for every gold medalist.
Wow, impressive. And I'm wondering, besides the podium, did TerraCycle participate in other projects with Olympic?
Yeah, so there was so after the podium was done, because we then had another year because it was delayed because of COVID. Some of the other collected material recycled into face shields, or PPE, that were distributed to for school for the deaf. For deaf children, so that they need to be able to see the lips when they read the lips, so they couldn't use a normal mask. So it was it was better for a clear face shield. So we made face shields, and the face shields were also distributed to the volunteers who worked at the Olympics as well. And that again was sponsored by Procter & Gamble.
Very interesting. And I read some impressive number, and I heard TerraCycle have helped to recycle over 8 billion waste pieces, which is an impressive number for me. And so I'm wondering, so besides podium, what else can we make with these waste?
So we made many different things, in China. We've made eco bags that have been used in Japan and Korea as well as China. We've made spatulas for makeup out of makeup bottles or skincare bottles. We make laundry baskets and shopping baskets made out of ocean plastic, and there's many things, pens made out of ocean plastic as well.
Wow.
So many really interesting things that you can make out of recycled materials. Pretty much almost anything.
Cool. TerraCycle is using a lot of packaging waste. So I'm curious, like how much packaging waste is generated worldwide each year?
So there's about 900 million tons of plastic waste generated. About 1/3 of that is attributed to single-use packaging waste. So it's about probably over 300 million.
Do you have number like which country is producing the most packaging waste and which?
I think you can guess. It's the United States.
Not surprised.
Yeah. United States used to be the largest. Well, I think they are still, but the United States and Japan are the two largest exporters of waste in the world. And so the US and Japan export a lot of plastic waste around the world.
刚才啊，从奥运会的领奖台开始说起啊，我跟 Eric 是聊了很多关于垃圾啊，或者说包装的问题。那我们特别呢是说到呢2个啊，这个垃圾制造大国，一个呢是美国，一个呢就是日本。虽然呢这2个国家人口上都不算是最多的，但是他们产生的垃圾啊真的是不得了啊。那很大程度上，我其实觉得呢，这个和一个大家关注的话题就是过度包装是很有关系的。我记得呢，我在美国的时候呢，给我的儿子在亚马逊上呢就买过一个尺子。那因为呢，现在这个超市呢很难去买这种简单小朋友用的、小学生用的这种尺子啊。结果寄来的时候啊，一个薄薄小小的这个25厘米的尺子，给我寄来了一个差不多鞋子盒那么大的一个纸盒子，而且里面为了能够填满这个空间啊，装了很多这种包材的纸。这个一打开就让我觉得哇塞，这也太浪费了。那大家呢，我想很多人都对于过度包装有吐槽的地方，有什么槽点呢？可以在我们的留言区呢和我们一起分享啊。而下面我们来听听 Eric 啊观察到哪个国家包装过度问题最严重。And I think like over packaging is a problem in a lot of places. Do you think that's very common? Like sometimes I receive a package, like I have to unwrap it for multiple times, And do you think that's a big problem? And does Japan or China have that issue?
I think probably Japan is a bigger problem than China. Japan has this gift purchasing, gift giving culture where they use a lot of beautiful packaging, and it creates a lot of over packaging. And in fact, actually, in terms of per capita, right? If you calculate how much plastic waste is generated based on the population per person, Japan is number 1 in the world. So Japan per person generates more plastic waste than any other country in the world. And overpackaging, of course, is part of that.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember like Japan has very beautiful packaging, I have to say, but sometimes it has a lot of layers. So can we reuse these packaging in our daily life? Like, do you have any tips? Like we can use, like sometimes I use a kind of a candle thing to plant some kind of little plants. Like what else like you can share? What can we make out of these packaging?
I mean, we did a lot of upcycling early on, trying to make things, repurpose things into other items. For example, drink pouches, basically like being ironed and pressed together and making them into like a bag, for example. We did that. We did a lot of bags made out of used packaging. And so what we did is, the laminate, you actually press them together and sew them into bags. And so we did a lot of those products in the past. The other thing is, I think, in general, we try to encourage, to refuse to accept shopping bags, for example. It's probably one of the biggest things you can do in daily life. And I think it's happening already, right, in China and in many countries, that retailers don't give away the free shopping bag anymore. So that's actually environmentally friendly as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to reduce the single-use packaging. And before TerraCycle was founded, like what was the recycle rate of these packaging waste? And where did these non-recycled packaging end up with?
Yeah, I mean, globally, recycling rates are like less than 20% globally, right? Apart from PET beverage bottles, very little packaging is recycled. Most of it is landfilled or incinerated, and in countries like Sweden, Germany, and Japan, a lot of it is used for waste energy. So it's incinerated, and the heat is used to drive a turbine, which creates some electricity. But it's not recycling. It's actually used as fuel. And so there's some controversy in the past about whether waste energy is recycling. It's actually not recycling because it's not circular, but it's like a fuel. But it's still better than just plain incineration. For packaging, it's still quite low.
Yeah, 20% is not a big number. Like that means there are a lot we can do about them. And tell us a little bit more about TerraCycle's founding stories. Which year was TerraCycle founded, and what's the story behind it?
So TerraCycle was founded 21 years ago by Tom Zaki, as a founder in New Jersey, the United States. When he was a student, he had the idea to create a business plan for school about collecting food waste from the cafeteria and using it as food for worms, and using the worm poop basically, as fertilizer, and to sell the fertilizer. And so he borrowed money, and he set it up and rented a garage. So it's really a garage startup. And collected food waste, fed it to worms, used the castings for fertilizer, and sold the fertilizer in used PT bottles to home centers.
Eric 刚才介绍的 TerraCycle 的这个创业故事啊，真的是非常有趣啊。这里呢，我再补充一些信息啊。它的创始人呢是叫做 Tom Zaki 啊，在普林斯顿大学上学的时候呢，就是一个出了名的垃圾狂人。那个时候他就经常去捣鼓啊，收集别人不要的东西啊，什么果汁包装啊，什么唱片啊等等，什么他都要。然后呢，再做成各种各样奇奇怪怪的新东西。后来呢，就像 Eric 刚才介绍那样，他呢就开始呢利用蚯蚓去分解呢食物垃圾。然后这个分解的过程当中呢，就会产生排泄物嘛。这个排泄物呢就被 Tom 呢制作成一种呢有机的肥料。那就此呢就淘到了人生的第一桶金。那他这一整套的垃圾回收再造的理念呢，同时也吸引了像卡夫啊、星巴克啊、家乐氏啊等等一些全球的巨头啊去跟他合作。慢慢呢就把这个 TerraCycle 越建越大。现在呢 TerraCycle 的年收入已经超过了7000万美元。而且呢，他们的业务也是遍布北美、欧洲、亚洲，包括中国在内约20个国家。
What does TerraCycle doing now?
We stopped doing that, and we did focus though on finding value in waste. So we shifted from fertilizer to recycling packaging.
Very interesting. Let's talk about the material. Like we use paper, we use plastic, we use wood, a lot of material to make our packaging. So which material is easier to recycle, which is not easy to recycle?
So probably one of the best things is aluminum. So of course, production of aluminum does require a lot of energy from LCA perspective, but aluminum is highly recyclable. In fact, most aluminum cans right now that you can buy in new products has recycled content. And that recycled content could be from more than 10 years ago. Could be like the 10th, 15th, 20th cycle. Because when you melt aluminum, you don't lose the strength properties. So it's a very good material for recycling. a lot of clear glass material as well can be recycled with very little material loss. Now, probably the worst ones for recycling are multi-layered materials. So if you think of refill pouches or pouches with shampoo, and they're kind of shiny laminated, so it's plastic with coating of aluminum or different types of layers. Yeah, that's very difficult to recycle, and the material value is quite low.
Oh, very interesting. Like, because a lot of companies are selling these pouches and position them as a sustainable option. So you don't have to buy new bottles every time. You can just refill. So it sounds like it's not the case. Are there any other kind of samples like this? Like, they claim they are very environmental friendly, but they are not.
So it depends too. Like, for example, when companies manufacture things that are biodegradable materials, for example, if there's some biodegradable plastics, and the problem is that in some countries, that plastic will never be composted. It'll only be burned. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But I think what you mentioned too is probably the best example. All the pouches, there's less material being used to make the pouch, but the pouch itself is less recyclable because it has not just one type of plastic, but maybe have several types of materials layered on top of each other, making it non-recyclable. Now, if you make it monomaterial, right, if you made it all out of polypropylene 100%, it could actually be easier to recycle, but they're multi-material.
Very interesting. And talking about the cost, which material is cheaper to recycle and which one is more expensive?
So I would say, like, PET beverage bottles, clear PET beverage bottles, and aluminum cans. The value of the material is much, much higher than the cost to recycle. So that's why, it's very economically efficient to do so. So recycling companies want to collect aluminum cans. They want to collect clear PET bottles because they can sell for a much higher price than they are required to pay for recycling, right?
So what will you advise consumer like me? Like, I want to buy packaging more green, but not so sure. Like, what do you think? Which type of packaging should I pick?
So it's sometimes it's hard because there's not much available, right? So, we'd say that if there's a recycling program available, I would do that. So, I mean, it's self-serving to say, but for example, beauty care products. So we do recycling for many beauty care brands in China right now. So in that case, the package at the end of life, for that beauty care brand, you can take it to a retail store and deposit it and know it'll be recycled. So, you can check for recyclability from the beginning. And in many cases, it won't be recyclable.
Sadly.
Yeah, sadly.
And yeah, besides material, what other factors are important in terms of the supply chain in recycling industry?
Yeah, so a lot of it is impacted, for example, by the price of oil. So if the price of oil is really cheap, the price of virgin plastic material also becomes very cheap. Then it's much more difficult to sell recycled material. If the price of oil is really high, then the price of the cost of manufacturing new resin also becomes very high. So again, it helps to increase the demand for recycled resin. So price of oil, has a big part in whether or not there's a market for recycled material or not. That actually is a very big factor.
And which country has the highest plastic recycling rate?
稍微打断一下，在我们听 Eric 回答到底哪个国家的垃圾回收率最高之前呢，我还想插播几句啊。那很多人说到垃圾回收都会觉得日本呢，它的垃圾回收做得很好。
去了以后确实它是非常好，我们呢之前呢还专门去拜访过它一个超级环保的零垃圾小镇啊，大家呢可以去关注一下我们的 Origin 研究所在小红书、微博、抖音、Instagram 等等上面的账号啊，我们最近也有更新的一个我们在日本拍的一个视频，专门就是说到这个垃圾他们如何回收的体验，真的是做的超级细、超级极致啊！但是要知道，只是把垃圾回收来，它只是第一步。而且分类做得好只是第一步的一个环节，但到底最终是不是这个垃圾回收率高，是不是把垃圾真正利用起来，那就不只是依靠呢垃圾回收、垃圾分类这第一步了，而是需要一个呢完整的产业链去帮助我们。下面我们就来听听Eric 他揭晓到底哪个国家的垃圾回收率最高，垃圾回收做得最好。
Yeah, that's a very good and difficult question because Japan used to be very high, but then it was recognized that Japan was counting waste energy incineration, and I think there was some discussions that probably shouldn't be counted as a recycling rate. So Japan is actually very low now. Germany, if you check, Germany continues to be reported as a country with the highest recycling rates. But you have to examine a little more to find out whether or not, or what amount is actually being put into waste to energy, and whether or not they're counting it in the recycling rate. It's not always too transparent. But European countries tend to have the highest rates.
Wow, interesting. So next time if I go to Germany, I will pay attention to their material.
Yeah.
Are there any different considerations for recycling different materials?
Yeah. So again, like if the materials are complex, it could be difficult to recycle. There's some plastics that degrade more once you melt them, like the fibers shorten. So you have to compound them with virgin material to make them usable again. Engineered, like we call engineered plastics, like ABS, for example. ABS is more resistant to structural change from heat. So ABS has a higher recovery rate in recycling. So maybe it's better material in that respect, but it's of course much more expensive. Polypropylene, some engineered PP as well, has very little degradation with melting. So it's also very good material.
我们不光有播客哦，爱地球的你，记得小红书关注 Origin 研究所，一起践行可持续的生活。
Next question, I think, is the question a lot of consumers have. It's why are recycled materials more expensive? And do they perform like worse or do they perform the same?
That's a good question. And so for recycled materials, first there's the cost of collecting it. Then there's the cost of probably separating into different types of materials. You have to wash it, you have to clean it, you have to shred it, and then you have to process it back into something usable, like pellets of plastic raw material. So that collection process, the separation process, the cleaning process, the shredding process, the pelletization process, all of that costs a lot of money, which is much more expensive than just taking, petroleum and creating new raw material in high volumes.
Got it. What about the performance? Do you think recycled material has the similar characteristics or
it's lower?
Worse?
Yeah, unfortunately, once you melt the plastic, the next time you use it, it's going to be weaker in general. But you can compound it with other plastic as well. So you can replace virgin material with recycled material and still be very useful. Of course, there's engineered plastics like ABS, right? Mm-hmm. ABS is highly recyclable, and the properties don't change when it melts. So it can be used many times with very little material loss.
I see. So it's better not to produce waste instead of recycling, right? To add in the first place.
Or reuse.
What material is TerraCycle primarily recycling now?
Mostly what we call polyolefin material. So like we are not needed to recycle aluminum cans. We're not needed for PET beverage bottles. Those are already system existing in many countries, recyclable through the city as well. So there's no need for us there, but there's more need for complex packaging. And a lot of the complex packaging is made with what we call polyolefins, which includes polypropylene, polyethylene, high-density polyethylene. Yeah, I think that's probably most of the material that we recycle is a polyolefin material.
Got it. So TerraCycle started the business from using the worm, and now it's getting into the recycling industry. So how did TerraCycle reposition its business, like enter the recycling industry? And was there any competitor at the time? And what was the pinpoint did TerraCycle try to solve?
We were looking at waste and how to find value in waste. And one of the biggest sources of waste was post-consumption packaging. And there was a focus, about how we can leverage that, how we can, transform packaging waste post-consumption into something usable. And that's, how the ideas for collection and recycling started. There were not a lot of competitors at the time because, it's difficult to do, it's expensive, there's not huge profit in it, but because we're a social enterprise, our priority is basically the impact as our main priority. So our environmental impact and the social impact are the main priority. Profit is a later priority. So because I think we're structured that we were able to do it, and because of that, there were very few competitors.
What was TerraCycle's breakthrough during the early days?
There was a company called Kraft Foods in the United States, a very big company called Kraft Foods, and they produced a drink for children called Capri Sun, and it comes in like an aluminum laminated pouch, like a little pouch drink. And of course, there are complaints that a lot of these are pretty much landfilled because there's no use for them afterwards. And so TerraCycle proposed to Kraft Foods that we offer, especially school children, a means to recycle those pouches. And we call it ready to drink. RTD means ready to drink. So the ready to drink market, like Coca-Cola or juices that are sold in small cartons, that market was shrinking at the time. However, after Kraft started that campaign with us, their sales and market share increased very significantly. And it was that time that we realized for the first time that if a company sponsors us to collect their post-consumption packaging, and consumer recognizes that the sponsor company, the manufacturer, is paying for that, it improves their view of the brand. And so it has increased what we call brand equity, right? It increased the value of the brand in the eyes of the consumers. And so that was a big breakthrough when we realized that sponsoring recycling for your brand could seriously or significantly improve the reputation of your company to the consumer.
What technology are used by the recycle industry?
Yeah, so there's more need for technology to increase automation in separation of materials. Mm-hmm. So there's like optical separation that can tell you polyolefin between PET. So I think there's a need for greater amount of automation in the separation of collected waste.
And interesting. And did TerraCycle did any improvement or upgrade the technology after it got into the recycle business?
Yeah, so a lot of the challenges in processing we had to adapt to. So learn how to compatibilize materials so we can blend different materials together. How to automate the removal of labels from used bottles, things like that. So there's a lot of little things that we learned along the way that help increase the efficiency.
And what is the process, recycle process, it's going to happen?
So I guess first we identified who the stakeholders are for a certain brand. who the consumers, because they're the ones who'll be using the product. And then once we identify the stakeholders, we find out, okay, where is it easiest for that stakeholder to take a package for recycling? So if a stakeholder is like school or children, of course, the school could be a collection point. That's how we start. If it's adult users, if you use up the product, you probably go to retail store to buy a new one, right? Same thing. There's a process to identify where to set the collection points to make it as easily as it is to access for a user. I think that's probably the first analysis. So who's the core or target customer, and how's it easiest for that person to recycle?
And does TerraCycle have any measurements or have any kind of making any effort to make sure the process is also sustainable and it's not producing or creating more pollution or carbon emissions?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we actually sit on the advisory board of many like nonprofit organizations, like Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're involved with World Economic Forum, many others, but we do self-audit as well. So we have hired like external third party to do an audit of our operations, and we've done life cycle assessments on our processes to ensure that indeed how we collect and recycle is better for the environment than disposal.
And what's the efficiency now?
It depends, but I mean, some programs we have recovery rates of over 90%. Sometimes it's a new complex material, maybe 80%, but it really depends on the type of material. Some programs, in volume, like if we have a steady volume, a higher increasing volume, we can achieve economies of scale because we can process more at one time. And that can lower the cost by 10, 20, 30% sometimes.
Yeah, you tell us a lot about the technology behind it, and in terms of the industry, like what is the focus in terms of upgrading technology? I mean, like what part of the process people trying the most to improve?
So there are a lot of new technologies that are under examination, like solvent recycling, dissolving plastic and then removing the material once it's liquefied. There is chemical recycling, which breaks down the polymers and essentially makes new polymer, almost like a new material. But I think probably more effort is needed in redesigning the package with the intent of recycling. So most packaging is one way, right? It's disposable, single use. So it would be important change for companies to redesign packaging for recyclability. That would be a big shift and a big change that would help a lot.
Look forward to see these improvements. And can you tell us more about TerraCycle's business model now?
Yeah, so we look for large, I think, multinational companies to work with. So companies are selling a lot of daily use products where the frequency is quite high because those are the largest contributors to waste.
说那么多呢，关于包装材料回收的问题啊，下面呢我还和 Eric 聊了聊关于商业模式的问题啊。一般大家一听说什么做环保啊，总是觉得有点像做公益，总觉得挣不到钱。不过 TerraCycle 啊，这20多年走下来已经把他们做成了一个年收入超过5亿人民币的一个好生意了，这个是非常不容易的。他们到底是怎么做到的呢？我们具体就来和 Eric 好好聊一聊。
I guess TerraCycle has evolved a lot in last 21 years, from warm to recycling packaging. So can you tell us a little bit more about, at the early days, what other business model did TerraCycle try? And who are the early adopters at that time?
Yeah, so I think early on, depending on the country, like some countries didn't realize that packaging waste was a problem. Like in Japan, people separate the waste in their home and they assume it's going to be recycled, but it's actually primarily incinerated, right? So I think one of the challenges at the beginning, or one of the necessary things, was education about why it's needed.
Do you still remember, like, how did you guys persuade the early adopters? Like, who are they? Like, from which industry?
Yeah, I mean, like in China, it was Colgate for oral care, L'Oreal for beauty care. Yeah, a lot of them, I think, had global mandates as multinational company to reduce their impact at that time. So some of those were easy to approach. Some, of course,
So it sounds like a beauty industry care a lot about the recycling problem, and which industry else?
Partly because we found that, like, for most of our programs, big majority of our collectors are female, maybe more than 70%. And I think, if you look at consumer research, in general, like, women tend to care more about the environmental issues than men do. And maybe it has to do with motherhood, or I don't know, but I think that's also why. Also because with beauty care, people really care about what they put on their face or on their skin, so they choose their products quite carefully, and quite often they like the products quite a bit. And so if you have a product that you really like, the funny thing is, after you use the last drop of that material, something you really like that becomes a piece of trash. Right.
Very interesting. All our male audiences, you guys can do better.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Help us to participate more in these recycling initiatives. And how many companies, how many corporations have TerraCycle been working with so far? And do you have any interesting case study to share?
Yeah, so there are 600 plus major companies working with us to recycle the post-consumption waste around the world. I think some really fun examples. Early on, we're making flower pots out of beauty care packaging and toothbrushes. In China, was really cool for a school project, providing school desks and chairs made from recycled material to a school in need in China. And that was another really popular project as well.
How many countries or regions have TerraCycle penetrated into already?
So 20 countries around the world now.
Wow, including China, Japan, right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Wow. And I guess different country, different region are different. So when TerraCycle entered a new market, like what kind of challenges are they facing in different countries? For example, in Europe, in Asia, it must be different. Can you tell us a little bit more?
So Europe was a lot easier because there's less regulation and there's a higher level of awareness and a higher willingness of consumers to pay more for environmental products. So I think Europe is a lot easier. China, it was difficult because of the scale. It's just so big. And then also penetrating with domestic companies could take a while to gain trust, I think. Japan, different issues, regulatory issues with collection of waste exist. But in addition, there's a very low awareness of the need to recycle. So like every region, like you said, exactly like you said, has unique problems. Yeah.
You mentioned about regulation multiple times. So I'm curious, like, what's the regulation, like global regulation or global policies now? And for different regions, like what type of regulation are usually established?
Mostly they're waste collection regulations. So how you can collect. And so the more highly regulated it is, it's more expensive. And I think that's probably the biggest thing.
And you mentioned when TerraCycle entered China, the size is a problem. It's a big country, right?
Yeah.
The population, it's very high. It's the number one or number two still in the world. So how did you guys conquer this challenge?
So it wasn't as hard. So we thought it was going to be difficult, but it was much easier because of social media. And China is very advanced in the use of social media. And so messaging to a very big population was much easier than we thought. So the China programs have grown much faster than other programs in the world because of the impact on the reach of social media.
Very interesting. Do you still remember like any interesting campaigns, any interesting projects in China?
And they made a very short TikTok video. And I don't remember the exact number, but I was told that, within a day, it's like 100 million hits within a day already. And it kept blowing up. The same thing with Colgate. There was a celebrity in China who helped endorse the program from Colgate, and because of that, celebrity on social media, again, it just blew up. Hundreds of millions of hits. And so what we realized, that something great about China was that the speed of communication and the reach of the social media channel was huge. And so, so social messaging in China it's much more accessible and faster than many of the countries. It just spread really quickly. And so it was, so in that respect, it was much easier than we thought. We received really positive feedback, really high participation rates. Again, primarily with women in China. But and that's why, so many beauty care companies started recycling.
You mentioned about Kiehl's, these brands. Can you introduce what type of companies TerraCycle is working with in China?
Yeah, so Kiehl's is skincare brand. Many of the L'Oreal brands, hair care brands within L'Oreal, like TerraCycle, for example, but also L'Occitane, New Skin. Many others like that as well. We sell boxes to collect waste for recycling to some accounting companies in Japan, in China, and we did waste collection from hotels in the past as well.
TerraCycle has entered China and some other Asian countries, including Japan, for several years. And over the time, do you feel consumer behavior has been changed?
Yeah, I think so. I think awareness of the issues. So actually, something that really was significant was the China government banning the import of plastic waste. And that had a lot of impact, because it made a lot of news around the region, around the world, where China's tired of accepting your trash, deal with it yourself, which is fair. And then China also then looking for other sources of recyclates in their own country, other countries having to deal with the problem now as well. I think that was a really positive change happened.
And you have been in the industry for many years as well. So how do you feel about the whole packaging and the recycling industry? Do you think they have been changed as well?
Yeah, definitely so. I think the consumer awareness, the demand, has forced many companies to respond to consumer attitude change. So it is changing for the better.
刚刚呢和 Eric 聊到 TerraCycle 在商业上的各种探索啊，大家可能也听出来了，和别的行业和别的生意一样，它也是需要呢去找用户的需求和痛点，在这个过程当中呢去找呢商业上的突破点。不同的地区、不同的国家，虽然呢各有各的特点啊，各有各的特色，但是啊要把业务展开，也是离不开围绕呢用户的需求去做开发。Eric 呢刚刚是说到呢，其实现在消费者的观念在不断的变化，也在呢促使呢企业端的变化。那到底消费者的观念发生什么样的变化？尤其啊对于我们中国消费者，参与度和接受度又怎么样呢？这个 C 端的生意到底要怎么做呢？下面我们接着和 Eric 聊。
And I know TerraCycle does not only work directly with the corporation, with the companies, but also it has the 2C business. So tell us a little bit more about that part and how it has been evolved over the last 21 years.
Yeah, so we do B2B and B2C. So there's a lot of recycling of factory waste in some countries, or expired products in some cases, but a lot of collections at retail, B2C, because it's easy for consumers to access, right? If you have something you run out of, you're going to buy something new, so it's very easy to take it in to buy something new.
I see.
So retail has been a really big key.
I see. So the 2C business, based on what's going on now, what kind of observation do you guys have about these consumers' behavior?
So we find that, as they become increasingly aware about the issue of plastic waste, like ocean plastic, right, was a big driver. So the awareness about ocean plastic and why that it's a problem, where it's coming from, caused a lot of people to rethink about, the consumption of single-use plastic. So I think that was a significant change, that kind of a social movement in a way, that raised awareness of the consumers. And so people reacted really strongly to that. The image of the turtle with the straw in its nose, you saw that probably. Yeah, that was a really big change.
And how consumer can directly use TerraCycle's service? Like I heard, I think I read something like in the US, so I, as a consumer, I can ask TerraCycle to help me to recycle my waste. Right?
Yeah, so if you go to our webpage, there's a list on the webpage of all the free programs that we have and how to access them at retailers, primarily retailers, yeah.
Got it. Not directly to consumers.
Yeah, not directly because it's too expensive for one-to-one.
And for different region, I think a consumer has different understanding of recycling values. So I think you mentioned about the green premium during our previous conversation. So tell us, what is green premium?
So because it costs more, like you said, to recycle, it means that basically if you use recycled material, it becomes more expensive. And so it's a premium that you have to pay for environmentally friendly products because it costs more to produce. So the premium, they call it green premium. So whether or not consumers are going to pay more or not is a question.
And how different people are reacting differently to green premium?
So if the product is positioned and marketed really well, people will, for example, like Patagonia is a very well-known brand, and it's considered as a cool environmental brand, and because many people are willing to pay more for it, right? So I think a lot of it is using design to make nicer, cooler products, to add value to design and branding as well. That can help increase the perception of the product and create willingness of the consumer to pay more for it. It's not an easy thing.
No, doesn't sound easy at all. So you mentioned about a female are more willing to participate in recycle. Like what other groups are you noticing are more into, like for example, the age group? Like Gen Z. So the young generation are more willing to participate. Why do you think they are more into this?
I think there's more communication. There's more communication tools. I think one becomes interested in a topic and shares with others.
And besides recycling, I think TerraCycle is also doing a lot of social responsibility programs in China. Can you tell us a little bit more and how it's helping the consumer changing their attitudes?
When we first started in China, we actually sponsored some volunteer groups in universities. And so we actually created a network of university students in the first few years to help us as ambassadors for our programs to educate their other students as well. And that was one thing that we had done early on to help get influencers, to get ambassadors for programs. Colgate was a sponsor as well, and there's outreach to communities and to children in schools as well. So that was a really, really helpful tool for us to start in China. It was not easy, but that's how we had to start, was education through schools.
In terms of the future, so what's your expectation for the recycling and the packaging industry in the future? And ideally, how the world you envision will be the best for the whole ecosystem, the Earth, the whole world, and anything we can.
So definitely. I think what's going to happen is I think you'll see that companies are going to change the way they design products. So most products and packaging are designed for single use or disposability, especially what we call fast-moving consumer goods. That's the highest frequency use, which creates the most garbage. And you'll start to see, I think, a more upstream change in design. So you probably hear the word circular economy a lot, right? Circular economy value. How's it created? well, for something to be in the circular economy, there really needs to be designed for circularity. So I think increasingly, brand companies, manufacturing companies, packaging companies will start increasing the upstream design for downstream circularity. So you design with the intent of recycling or design with the intent of reuse. I think that's going to be the big change.
Cool. And does TerraCycle have any plan, like what we can expect in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're still trying to help scale up recycling for complex materials, trying to influence companies who sponsor us or partner with us to make upstream changes to make things easier to recycle. And we're going to continue on that as well.
感谢 Eric 的分享，也感谢各位的陪伴。那最后再提醒一下呢，如果呢想要看我们完整版的翻译稿的同学呢，可以呢去关注我们的微信账号 Origin 研究所。而希望呢这期节目呢可以给大家更多的启发，大家一起来探讨呢如何把可持续呢做成好生意。也希望呢更多的朋友，尤其是我们的男同学们，可以更多的加入到我们这些循环使用的行动当中。当然了，最好的还是我们少消费，少制造垃圾。想要了解呢更多可持续相关的资讯呢，欢迎呢各位呢关注我们在社交媒体，包括微博、抖音、小红书、ins 等等上的账号 Origin 研究所。那今天呢就到这里，那喜欢我们的朋友呢，记得一定要订阅我们。我是一佳，我们下期再见，拜拜。